My name is Samantha Quinn. I was 27 when they threw me under the bus, professionally, surgically, and without hesitation. At the time, I was the youngest project lead at Bellwether Capital, a boutique investment firm run by people who smiled at you while sharpening the knives behind their backs. I'd worked harder than anyone to get there. First one in, last one out. Coffee-fueled nights, skipped holidays, weekends blurred into spreadsheets and pitch decks. I didn't complain. I wanted to prove I belonged, that I wasn't just another ambitious 20-something trying to climb too fast. But in hindsight, that was my first mistake, believing that competence would protect me. The project was called Redwood, a high-stakes merger between two logistics giants. I was brought in 6 weeks before signing to handle due diligence. The numbers didn't add up, not at first. There were minor inconsistencies in the valuation reports, some oddly timed asset shifts, and one flagged subsidiary that hadn't reported revenue in over 6 months. I brought it up during an internal review. My manager, Thomas Blake, nodded, took notes, and said, "Good catch, Sam. Let's keep this between us for now." Stupidly, I trusted him. Redwood went through. 3 months later, one of the companies involved collapsed. Fraud, hidden liabilities, lawsuits, and Bellwether. They needed a name to attach to the fallout. My name. I was called into HR under the guise of a performance review. But the moment I stepped into the room, I knew. The expression on their faces wasn't disappointed. It was rehearsed. The HR rep flipped through a folder like she hadn't memorized every word inside. Failure to report discrepancies. Negligence in due diligence. Undermined client trust. I tried to speak. I told them about the meeting with Blake, about the concerns I raised, about the data trail, but all I got was a sad smile and a printed termination agreement. "You can fight this legally," they said, "but it'll get ugly. Best to walk away quietly. We'll include a neutral reference clause." Neutral reference. I walked out of the building that day with a banker's box and a reputation in shreds. No public scandal, just silence. The kind of silence that spreads like smoke in finance circles. Emails stopped coming. Calls were never returned. Recruiters ghosted. In 3 weeks, I went from rising star to professional ghost. But here's the thing about ghosts. We see everything, and we remember. I didn't scream, didn't go to the press, didn't sue. I disappeared, took the money I'd saved, moved to a different city, and started consulting. Quietly, anonymously, under an LLC with no public trace to my name. I built a network. Clients who didn't care about bellwethers. Whisper campaign. Startups, mid-size firms, international partners. I helped them scale, optimize, prepare for acquisition. I watched every deal structure, every loophole, every method the big players use to manipulate outcomes. And I learned how to do it better. While they forgot about me, I studied them. I followed Blake's rise through LinkedIn updates and trade articles. After Redwood, he was promoted to partner. Figures. The bonus must have been astronomical. I followed the firm's new leadership strategy, the ones they touted as leaner and cleaner after the Redwood fallout. I watched them pivot toward venture deals, riskier plays, looser oversight, all wrapped in the same slick PR packaging. They thought I was gone. They didn't realize I was building something, not for revenge, for takeover. 2 years later, I founded my own firm, Q&A Strategies. Publicly, it was a boutique advisory group specializing in pre-IPO optimization. Privately, it was a weapon. I brought in 3 people I trusted, 2 former analysts who'd also been edged out at Bellwether, and 1 forensic accountant who used to work for the SEC. We weren't just advising, we were analyzing, mapping every weakness. Every vulnerability in firms like Bellwether. We consulted for their competitors, embedded ourselves in deals they didn't even know we were part of. And slowly, inch by inch, we chipped away at their influence. Then came the opportunity I'd been waiting for. A European conglomerate wanted to enter the US market, quietly. They needed a proxy acquisition, someone local to front the deal while they stayed off the radar. Bellwether was already courting them, but they weren't the only option. I sat in a hotel suite in Zurich across from their executive lead, slid a folder across the table, and said, "Let me show you what they don't want you to know." Inside, the folder, everything, data manipulation, inflated valuations, internal memos from Redwood that Blake had signed. The executive leaned back, impressed. "How quickly can you move?" he asked. "Faster than they'll see coming." By the time Bellwether found out I was behind the counteroffer, it was already done. They didn't know my name at first. The new firm, the quiet moves, the shell companies I used to shift assets. But Blake, he recognized the pattern, he knew, and he panicked. But it was too late. Because the deal wasn't just about taking a client, it was about positioning. And what they didn't realize, not yet, was that the company I now controlled was about to buy them. The first move wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was a signature on a contract, buried in a pile of shell corporations and holding entities. The European conglomerate moved quietly through a local intermediary. Me. Q&A Strategies was now the face of the deal. On paper, it looked like a mid-level acquisition, a routine buy-in for market access. But the truth was far more surgical. We weren't entering the market. We were infiltrating Bellwether's ecosystem from the inside out. Within weeks, I had access to everything that mattered: vendor contracts, distribution partners, regional infrastructure, even junior analysts who had worked with Bellwether before. They had no idea who was pulling the strings behind this advisory firm. They still thought I was gone, that the name Samantha Quinn had faded into the archive of forgettable cautionary tales. But I was already inside the walls, and I was carving my path room by room. The second move was timing. Bellwether had overextended. Their pivot into venture investing had looked good on press releases, but I knew the numbers behind the headlines. Too many high-risk deals. Too much capital tied up in shaky valuations. A single drop in confidence, and they'd scramble. That's exactly what I gave them. I leaked a rumor to an industry blog. Nothing definitive, just enough to stir unease. A whisper about restructuring, possible layoffs, concerns over the Redwood legacy still haunting their books. Within 72 hours, 2 of their mid-tier clients pulled scheduled investments. The market twitched. Bellwether's leadership scrambled. I watched from my office while sipping tea, tracking real-time analytics as their internal crisis response kicked in, slow, outdated, arrogant. Just like I remembered. Then came the third move. One of Bellwether's key suppliers, a data firm, had been struggling for months. They needed a capital injection or risked folding. I made them an offer. Quiet, off-market, full acquisition through a proxy. They accepted. Now I had access to Bellwether's operational data stream. Everything. Every call log. Every client update. Every internal memo. I didn't just know what they were doing. I knew what they were thinking. Blake was getting desperate. I could see it in the pattern of his communications. Longer meetings with legal, quiet conversations with PR. And then, finally, the boardroom audit. They launched an internal review. Too late. Because by the time they realized they needed to clean house, I already had a seat at the table they didn't know existed. Through Q&A, I was now an external, strategic partner for 3 of Bellwether's top-tier investors. I helped them with financial positioning, risk exposure, and market intelligence. They trusted me, more than they trusted Bellwether's own people. So when I suggested a vote to restructure leadership in light of volatility, they listened. And suddenly, Blake wasn't untouchable anymore. I didn't want to remove him yet. Not fully, not publicly. He was still useful, as a face, as a shield. But I needed him to feel it. To sense the shift in power without understanding where it came from. So I sent him a message, anonymous email, encrypted. 1 sentence. "You should have listened in that meeting, Thomas. It didn't have my name. It didn't need to. He knew." Next day, he skipped a press event. The day after that, he canceled 3 internal presentations. He was unraveling, and while he did, I prepared the final blow. We drafted the acquisition proposal under a different name, a foreign holding company tied to the European conglomerate. On paper, it was a merger. In reality, it was a takeover. And the buyout terms? Generous. Just enough to tempt them. Just enough to make them think they still had control. But once signed, the new board would be formed. 5 seats, 3 of which were already in my pocket. They'd walk into the deal thinking they saved the company. They'd walk out realizing they'd handed it to the very person they once destroyed. On a Tuesday morning at 9:04 a.m., Bellwether's board voted, unanimous press releases were drafted. Phrases like strategic alignment and market synergy filled the headlines. Blake stood in front of a podium, smiling that same rehearsed smile I'd seen the day he threw me under the bus. He didn't know. Not yet. But I was already in the building. And next week, I'd be in his office. Walking back into Bellwether wasn't emotional. It wasn't nostalgic. It was strategic. Every step through the lobby, every corner I turned, I wasn't remembering the past. I was calculating how much of it I was about to erase. The receptionist looked up and smiled politely. She didn't recognize me. Good. That meant they'd forgotten what I looked like when I was disposable. When I walked out 2 years ago with a cardboard box and a target on my back, no one thought I'd be back, especially not like this. But here I was, not as an employee, not as a consultant, as one of the new controlling partners. The transition period was formalized through legal language, but the reality was simpler. We now owned a controlling interest in Bellwether Capital. And with that came full access. Meetings, systems, personnel. Blake hadn't figured it out yet. He was still operating under the illusion that this was a merger, a fresh injection of capital, a second chance. He'd smiled during the introductory call, told me he looked forward to collaborating, never realizing that every word he said was being filed away. By me. My new office was 2 floors above where I used to sit. No more cubicles, no more shared kitchens. This time I had a private suite with a skyline view. Symbolic? Maybe. But I earned that view. Every square meter of it. The first week I said almost nothing. I attended meetings, observed dynamics, took notes, not on paper, in memory, who spoke the most but said the least, who shifted blame, who interrupted the junior staff, who still referred to Redwood as a PR hiccup. Patterns hadn't changed. The same rot I'd seen before was still here, just with better suits and shinier titles. But the difference? This time, I wasn't under them. I was above them. Blake was the first one I moved on. Not fired. That would be too kind. I needed to dismantle him slowly until he had no more ground to stand on. I started by reassigning oversight. Quietly, his authority was sliced apart, department by department. He noticed. Of course he did. But he couldn't object, not publicly, not without admitting he didn't understand what was happening. Then came the staff. I didn't purge them, I rotated them. Key loyalists were promoted into roles with no influence. Middle managers were transferred to alignment divisions that reported directly to me. New blood was brought in from Q&A, people who knew how I operated, and more importantly, who they were actually working for. I held one-on-one meetings with every department lead. I asked them the same 3 questions. What's the biggest risk you're hiding? What's the one process you'd kill if you had the authority? And who's the most overrated person in this building? Their answers told me everything. Most of them danced around the truth. One of them, a junior VP in compliance, gave me exactly what I needed. There's a series of payments, she said, linked to third-party vendors. Low-level stuff but flagged in internal audits last year, buried in Blake's department. I nodded. Keep digging. Quietly. She did. Within days, I had the thread, a kickback scheme. Nothing massive, but enough to breach protocol, enough to tie Blake's name directly to misconduct. Again. Only this time, I wasn't the one taking the fall. I met with the board, the new board, mine, presented the findings, calm, factual. I didn't spin it. Our Xiao can issue a quiet departure, I said. Or we can go public and remind the market we clean house. They chose the former, and just like that, Blake was gone. No headlines, no goodbye speech, just a one-line email. Thomas Blake is stepping away to pursue new opportunities. I watched him leave the building from my office window. Same suit. Same swagger. But no one walked with him. He didn't even look back. The following Monday, I addressed the company. Simple. 5 minutes, no slides, no jargon. I told them the truth, not all of it, but enough, that we were entering a new era, that transparency wasn't a slogan, it was policy, that the culture of passing blame was over, that I would not be the kind of leader who smiled in public and gutted people in private, but I would be the kind who demanded results. There was silence, then applause. Polite, tentative. They didn't trust me yet. Good. Let them earn me like I had to earn everything. That night, I sat alone in my office. I opened the old file, the one labeled Redwood Report Final, the same file they'd used to blame me. I read it again, line by line, and then I moved it to the archive. Not to forget, to remind myself. That silence isn't weakness. It's a strategy. And inside these walls, I was no longer the one being watched. I was the one watching. Power has a scent. You can feel it shift in the room before anyone says a word. And the week Blake left Bellwether for good, the air inside that office changed. People walked differently. They spoke less. They looked over their shoulders, not out of fear, but out of uncertainty. They could feel the balance had tilted, that the old order had been dismantled, that someone else was in control now. But what they didn't know was just how far that control extended. I didn't come to rebuild Bellwether. I came to rewrite the rules. The first thing I did was shut down every vanity project Blake had greenlit in the final 6 months of his reign. Overfunded, underperforming, filled with friends of friends, gone, overnight, no explanation, no mercy. I redirected those funds into an internal think tank, small, fast, aggressive. I handpicked the team, former underdogs, analysts who'd been overlooked, assistants who had been ignored. I gave them one mandate: find the next move before the rest of the market even sees the opening. Within 3 weeks, they delivered. A niche sector in green logistics was heating up, untapped, undervalued, and primed for disruption. We moved fast, acquired a minority stake in 2 startups, then leveraged their backend to pitch a unified platform to our existing clients. No one saw it coming. Not our competitors, not even our investors. That's when the phone calls started. First from industry, journalists, then from hedge funds, then from the same people who once blacklisted my name. They wanted to know how Bellwether had turned around so fast, who was behind the shift, who had the vision. And slowly, quietly, a name started circulating. Not a brand, not a team, my name, Samantha Quinn. I was invited to speak on a private panel, invite only, off the record, hosted by a network of elite female executives, the kind of women who didn't just break ceilings, they built higher ones. I accepted, showed up in a fitted navy suit, no notes, no entourage, just me and the story they weren't ready for. I told them about the betrayal, the setup, the silence, and then I told them about the return, the rebuilding, the takeover. I didn't use corporate lingo. I spoke plainly, sharply. The best revenge isn't beating them at their game, I said. It's changing the game so they can't play it anymore. When I walked off stage, they didn't clap politely. They stood, back at Bellwether, the E. Ripple effects began. Resume submissions tripled. Venture partners requested meetings. 2 major competitors tried to poach members of my think tank and failed. Because I'd already locked them in with equity and a vision. We weren't just back in the game, we were setting the pace. And then came the offer. One of the oldest firms in the sector, a legacy name with global influence, approached me for a strategic partnership. On the surface, it looked like an olive branch. Underneath, it was a containment move. They wanted to box me in before I got too big. I declined. Politely. Then I doubled down on expansion. Internally, I started shifting the culture. No more promotions based on tenure. No more performance reviews as weapons. We installed transparent KPIs across every department, launched anonymous reporting systems, and required all directors to spend 1 day a month shadowing their lowest-level team members. Some resisted. They didn't last, because I didn't build this company to be liked. I built it to never be vulnerable again. And slowly, I could see it happening. Not just in the numbers, but in the eyes of the people, in the halls. They weren't afraid, they were invested. They saw the fire behind the polish. The strategy behind the structure. They saw what no one at Bellwether ever saw when I was just a quiet project lead. They saw the queen. One evening, as I was leaving late, a junior analyst stopped me near the elevator. Nervous, probably rehearsed, the line 5 times in his head before speaking. "Ms. Quinn," he said, "do you mind if I ask how you did it? How you came back after what they did?" I looked at him for a second, saw the hunger, the need to believe it was possible. "I didn't come back," I said. "I never left. I just waited until they were too comfortable to see me coming." The elevator opened. I stepped inside, left him standing there. Maybe one day he'll understand. I always knew this day would come. The day the people who buried me would crawl back into my life. Not with knives this time, but with smiles. Not to destroy me, to survive me. It started with an email. "Would you be open to reconnecting?" The name made me stop. Lena Harrington, my old supervisor. One of the 3 who sat in that HR meeting and nodded as I was handed a termination letter. She wasn't the one who forged the narrative. That was Blake. But she was complicit. She watched it happen. She let it happen. And now she wanted to reconnect. How convenient, I didn't reply. Not right away. Instead, I pulled up her LinkedIn profile. She'd left Bellwether 6 months after my exit, landed a cushy role at a smaller investment firm. Mid-level, regional, nothing impressive. And now, that firm was one of our acquisition targets. She hadn't figured it out yet, but I had. 3 days later, I walked into the conference room for our first round of negotiations. Lena was there. When she saw me, her face froze for half a second. A flicker of disbelief, followed by something that almost resembled fear. "Samantha," she said, standing a little too quickly. "I didn't realize you were leading this." I smiled. Apparently, a lot of people didn't realize where I'd end up. She laughed, nervous. Tried to play it cool. "Well, life's funny like that, huh?" "Not really," I said, sitting down. "Some of us planned for this." The meeting was professional, tense. She kept stealing glances at me, trying to read how much I remembered, how much I knew. What she didn't realize was that I remembered everything. Every look. Every silence. Every time she could have said something, but chose not to. And now, here she was, pitching a merger, needing my approval, trying to present herself as relevant again. I let her talk. And then I asked one question. "Tell me, Lena, if a junior project lead flagged a major red flag in a deal today, would you ignore it like you did before?" The room went dead quiet. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "I don't think this is the time to—" "No," I interrupted. "This is exactly the time." She didn't respond. And that was enough. After the meeting, she caught me in the hallway. "I made mistakes," she said. "Back then, I didn't know everything." "You knew enough," I said. Her eyes welled, but I didn't care. I leaned in, close enough that only she could hear me. "Don't worry, Lena. I'm not here to destroy you. That'd be too easy. I'm here to make sure people like you never hold power again." That night, I opened the old folder again, the one labeled HR Records Internal. Not the fake one they gave me, the real one. I had pulled it 2 years ago, using credentials I wasn't supposed to have access to, right before I left Bellwether. It had everything: internal messages, manager evaluations, the quiet decision chain that made me the scapegoat. And at the top, a name I hadn't seen in years: Jason Merrick, the man above Blake, the one who orchestrated the entire Redwood mess from behind the curtain. He was gone from Bellwether now, retired early, living in upstate New York, writing blog posts on ethical leadership. I nearly laughed, but I didn't want a confrontation. I wanted a legacy correction. A month later, I was invited to speak at a national finance ethics symposium. It was a PR event hosted by regulators and execs trying to pretend the system could fix itself. Guess who else was on the panel? Jason Merrick. They introduced him first. He spoke about transparency, about culture, about learning from mistakes. Then it was my turn. I walked to the stage, took a breath, and told the room exactly what had happened during Redwood. Not names, not lawsuits, just facts. A young project lead who flagged a concern, a leadership team that buried it, a company that needed a scapegoat, and a woman who turned silence into strategy and came back to own the company that broke her. The audience was stunned. Merrick wouldn't meet my eyes, and the next day, headlines read, "Unknown CEO delivers brutal truth bomb at ethics conference." I didn't comment. I didn't need to. A week later, Merrick emailed me, 2 words, "You won." I didn't reply, because it was never about winning. It was about rewriting the ending. I didn't build my empire to stay hidden. I built it so that one day, when I walked into a room, every person would know exactly who I was and what I had survived. The difference now? I didn't have to introduce myself. I didn't need a title or a business card. The name Samantha Quinn spoke for itself. But this wasn't about revenge anymore. Not really. It was about visibility, about rewriting the narrative from the girl who got buried to the woman who rewrote the rules. And the world was finally watching. It started with a single article, a feature piece in a major finance magazine titled "The Quiet Queen of Wall Street." They asked for an interview. I agreed. On one condition, no edits. I would speak once, clearly, and they could print exactly what I said, or nothing at all. The article went live on a Monday morning. By noon, it had 1 million views. By sunset, I had 4 speaking offers, 2 documentary pitches, and a seat on a national ethics advisory panel. But what I didn't expect was the wave of messages from strangers, young analysts, fired assistants, burned out VPs, people who had been stepped on, silenced, discarded. They weren't just congratulating me, they were thanking me, because in a world that loved to pretend fairness existed, I had done something radical. I told the truth, unfiltered, unapologetic, unafraid, and now I was everywhere. The first live interview aired 2 weeks later. Prime time, full broadcast, I wore a simple black suit, no jewelry, no fluff. The host smiled and leaned in, rehearsed and confident. "You were labeled a liability when you left Bellwether," she said. "What do you say to the people who made that call?" I didn't hesitate. I hope they're still watching, because this is what a liability looks like when she's done waiting to be invited back. Silence. Then applause. The clip went viral. Again. I started getting invitations I never expected. Private roundtables with government officials, offers to mentor executive programs, even keynote slots at events run by the very firms that once locked me out. Said yes. To some, no, to most, because I didn't need validation. I already had something more powerful. Control. But there was one move left to make. One that wasn't about me. It was about legacy. I started a fund. Quiet at first, built for women and minorities who had been pushed out of finance before they ever got a chance to rise. I named it the Redwood Initiative, not to remember the fall, but to own it, to turn the symbol of my betrayal into a badge of resilience. Within a month, it was fully funded. Within 6, it had backed 10 startups. Not one of them had a founder who came from privilege, and every one of them knew my story, not because I wanted praise, because I wanted them to know what was possible. The final step. I returned to Bellwether's headquarters, now renovated, rebranded, rebuilt. We were hosting an international summit, and for the first time, I stood in the same auditorium where I used to sit quietly in the back. Ignored, invisible. This time, I was the keynote speaker. The lights dimmed. I walked to the podium and began. When they took everything from me, I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I watched. I learned. And I waited. Not for permission. For power. I paused. And now that I have it, I'm not asking anymore. The room erupted. Cameras flashed. And in that moment, I didn't feel like I'd won. I felt like I'd arrived. Power isn't loud, it doesn't brag, it doesn't scream to be seen. True power walks into a room and doesn't have to say a word, because everyone already knows who's in charge. And now, when I walked into any room, they all knew. Was no longer the girl they set up to fall. I was the woman they couldn't touch, because I had climbed higher than any of them had ever imagined. And the crown? It didn't wobble. It didn't slip. It sat exactly where I put it. On my own head, earned with silence, built with precision. Bellwether had become something no one predicted, not just profitable, but unshakable. We weren't chasing trends, we were setting direction. The press called me ruthless. I preferred calculating, because everything I did had a purpose. Every decision, every deal, every hire, none of it was about revenge anymore. It was about legacy. We launched new verticals, expanded globally, built a culture that didn't just tolerate transparency, it demanded it. I watched people who once looked down on me now study me, try to imitate me. Some even apologized, quietly, hoping I'd say it didn't matter. I never did, because it did matter. They mattered, every one of them. The liars, the enablers, the cowards. They were the reason I became this version of myself. And for that, I was grateful. One morning, I received an email from a university I had once applied to as a young analyst, the one that rejected me for their MBA program. They now wanted to name a leadership lecture series after me. I accepted. On one condition. I'd give the first talk. The room was filled with the next generation, bright, polished, eager to impress. They didn't know the girl I once was. All they saw was the version the world now recognized: CEO, strategist, powerhouse. I looked at them and said, "You think power comes when people finally see you? It doesn't. It comes when you stop needing them to." Silence. Then, "You're not here to be given a seat. You're here to build the damn table." They stood, applauded. I nodded once, then walked out. I didn't stay for the photos. I had nothing to prove. Back at Bellwether, my assistant handed me a memo, another acquisition offer, another competitor trying to fold us in, this time with flattery. "We admire your leadership," it read. "We believe there's alignment." I laughed. They still didn't get it. I didn't build this to align. Built it so no one could ever push me out again. I passed the memo back with a single note: not interested. That night, I sat alone in my office. No meetings, no calls, just me and the city lights outside. I opened the drawer where I kept one thing I never threw away, the termination letter from 2 years ago. The one Blake and his team had made me sign. I read it once, folded it, then burned it. Not because I was angry, because I didn't need it anymore. The story was already written, and I had won. People always ask me if I forgive them, if I've moved on, if I still think about what they did. The answer? Of course I do. Not with pain, with clarity. Because every scar is a map, showing me where not to return, and just how far I've come. They buried me. They thought I'd disappear. They thought I'd break. But queens don't break. They rise. And this crown, it never slips.